In the dim light of a Seattle YMCA hall around 1962, a karate and judo black belt, convinced kung fu lacked substance against traditional fighting arts, finally cornered Bruce Lee after weeks of veiled criticisms. In 11 seconds of controlled fury, Lee delivered a precise sequence, deflecting a grab, landing rapid punches to the face and body, followed by a single kick that left the challenger unconscious on the floor with a bloodied nose. The man rose eventually, but something essential in him had shifted forever. The dismissal of kung fu ended there, in quiet, irreversible fact. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Seattle remained a city of quiet transitions, its waterfront and university district slowly absorbing waves of new arrivals from Asia and the American South. Martial arts existed in pockets, small, dimly lit rooms above shops or in community centers, where Japanese karate and judo dojos held firm alongside scattered Chinese kung fu classes. These styles rarely overlapped openly. Practitioners trained in their own circles, bound by tradition and the unspoken rule that one did not question the other's validity without cause. Bruce Lee arrived in Seattle in 1959 at the age of 18, having left Hong Kong behind. He worked first in a restaurant owned by a family friend, then enrolled at Edison Technical School to complete his high school education. By 1960, he began teaching what he called Jun Fan Gung Fu, a direct adaptation of Wing Chun principles he had studied under Ip Man, starting informally with a handful of acquaintances. His first students included James DeMille, a former boxer, and Jesse Glover, an African-American judo practitioner who sought practical self-defense amid the racial tensions of the era. Training took place in makeshift spaces, a parking lot near a hospital, a corner of a basement, then eventually a small room where bare bulbs cast long shadows on concrete walls. The downtown YMCA on 4th Avenue served as a neutral ground. Here, karate classes ran on regular schedules, their practitioners arriving in crisp white gis, emphasizing linear power, strong stances, and tournament discipline. Judo sessions filled other hours, focusing on throws and control. Chinese styles appeared less frequently, mostly in demonstrations that drew curious onlookers from the university or local immigrant communities. Skepticism toward kung fu lingered in these spaces. To some trained in Japanese systems, the flowing movements and close-range techniques seemed theatrical, lacking the direct impact of a well-executed karate strike or judo throw. Remarks passed quietly after demonstrations, questions about practicality, about whether such arts held up against real combat training. Lee himself avoided confrontation. He demonstrated, when invited, chain punches delivered with startling speed, wooden dummies struck in precise rhythm, but he spoke little of superiority. His teaching emphasized efficiency, intercepting force rather than opposing it, adapting without rigid form. Students noticed his calm presence, the way he corrected technique with minimal words, letting the body learn through repetition. Word of his classes spread slowly through word of mouth among those who trained nearby. A few karate practitioners attended his early sessions out of curiosity, observing without committing. Others dismissed the approach outright, seeing it as another variation of something untested in their world. The atmosphere at the YMCA carried an undercurrent of comparison. Men from different backgrounds shared the same locker rooms, the same mats at different hours. Conversations after class touched on philosophies, on what constituted effective fighting. No one demanded proof yet. The differences remained theoretical. But proximity bred awareness. A young Chinese instructor teaching fluid, economical movements in one room, while across the hall a karate black belt drilled powerful linear attacks in another. The city itself, rain-swept, industrial, still finding its place in a changing America, provided the quiet backdrop where these worlds brushed against each other. It was in this setting, unhurried and unannounced, that the first threads of tension began to form, not through grand declarations, but through repeated glances, subtle remarks, and the natural friction that arises when established ways meet something new. Among the regular faces at the downtown YMCA stood a man who had earned respect through consistent results. He held black belts in both Shotokan karate and judo, credentials gained through years of disciplined training and local tournament success. At approximately 6 feet tall and carrying a solid 250 pounds of muscle built from heavy labor and rigorous practice, he moved with the deliberate authority of someone accustomed to controlling space. His name, in the stories passed down, varies slightly. Some recall him as a practitioner named Bob, or simply as the big karate guy. But the essentials remain consistent. He was strong, technically proficient, and deeply convinced of the superiority of the Japanese systems he had mastered. He had watched Bruce Lee's demonstrations more than once. Lee would appear by invitation, usually during an open session or a special class, and perform sequences on the wooden dummy or against a partner. The movements were fast, compact, economical, nothing wasted, no flourishes for effect. To many observers, the speed alone was striking. To this karateka, however, the absence of large, powerful chambered punches and deep-rooted stances signaled weakness. He saw circular deflections where he expected linear blocks, close-range trapping where he valued distance and impact. After one such session, he began to voice his opinion quietly at first, in the locker room or over coffee with fellow students. "Kung Fu looks pretty," he would say, "but it's theater. When you're facing someone who knows how to hit, all those little hands and feet won't matter." The remarks were not shouted, they were delivered matter-of-factly, the way one states an obvious truth among peers. He did not name Lee directly in the beginning. He spoke in general terms about Chinese styles, about how they relied on flowery technique instead of raw power. Yet everyone understood the target. The YMCA was small enough that news traveled in whispers. Over the following weeks, the discontent became personal, though still unspoken between the two men. The karateka no longer confined his remarks to private conversations. In a casual gathering after class, with several people present, he stated plainly that he would like to see how Lee's gung fu held up against a real fighter, someone who had proven himself in the ring and on the mat. He did not issue a formal challenge, he simply made the statement, then waited. The room grew quiet. No one laughed. No one interrupted. Everyone understood that the line had been drawn, however softly. Lee was present that evening, standing near the edge of the group, arms relaxed at his sides. He met the other man's gaze for a moment, then looked away, not in submission, but in dismissal of the need for immediate response. He said nothing. The silence that followed carried more force than any reply could have.
The karateka left the conversation believing the matter remained open. Those who knew Lee better recognized the look, calm, controlled, already measuring distance and timing in his mind. The stage had been set not through shouting or posturing, but through the slow accumulation of doubt and certainty, each man quietly occupying his position. What remained was only the moment when proximity and expectation would finally close the gap.
The downtown YMCA became a place where silence spoke louder than words. The two men did not seek each other out, yet their paths crossed almost daily. Different hours, same corridors, same mats still warm from the previous class. The Karateka continued his routine. Heavy Kihan drills, powerful kata performed with full intention, sparring sessions where his size and strength dominated. Students watched him move with the certainty of someone who had never truly been tested beyond his own limits. Bruce Lee arrived earlier or stayed later, depending on his schedule at the university or the restaurant. When he taught, the room felt different. Fewer people, quieter atmosphere. He worked with 1 or 2 students at a time, correcting angles of entry, the timing of a stop hit, the subtle weight shift that turns defense into offense. His voice remained low, measured. Instructions came as observations rather than commands. Those who trained with him began to carry themselves differently, straighter posture, calmer eyes, even outside the dojo. The karateka noticed these changes. He saw how Lee's students no longer flinched at the sound of heavy punches against the heavy bag. He heard fragments of conversation, someone mentioning how a simple deflection had redirected an incoming strike with almost no effort. Each small detail fed his growing conviction that something needed proving, not for ego, but for clarity. He believed the truth of fighting lay in what could be seen and felt, not in what was promised. Over the course of several months, the remarks grew more direct. In the locker room, after a shower, he would say to anyone listening, "I've got no problem with Chinese styles. I just don't see how they survive against someone who actually hits hard." No names were mentioned, but the implication was unmistakable. A few of Lee's students heard the words and felt the weight. 1 or 2 approached Bruce afterward, hesitant. "They keep talking," they would say. Lee listened, then asked a single question. "Does he want to find out?" The student would shake his head. "Not yet, but he's getting louder." Lee would nod once, then return to whatever he had been doing, sharpening a dummy dan, reviewing notes, or simply standing in stillness. The tension never erupted into argument. No raised voices, no ultimatums. Instead, it settled like damp air, present, persistent, impossible to ignore. Other practitioners began to sense it too. Conversations in the hallways shifted. People asked questions they had never asked before. Which one would win in a real fight? Is Kung Fu really practical? Has anyone ever tested it against karate? The answers varied, but the question itself became common currency. By the spring of 1962, the anticipation had thickened into something almost tangible. The karateka continued to train with the same intensity, but now he trained with an audience in mind. He struck harder, threw opponents more decisively, as if preparing the ground. Lee, meanwhile, remained unchanged, same calm demeanor, same economical movements. Yet those who watched closely noticed a subtle sharpening, the way his eyes followed movement in the room, the fractionally quicker response when a partner attacked, the subtle weight shift that turns defense into offense. Those who trained with him began to carry themselves differently, straighter posture, calmer eyes, even outside the dojo. The moment arrived without fanfare.
One afternoon, after a regular karate class had ended and most people had left, the big man stayed behind. He found Lee in the smaller training room, working alone on footwork patterns. No crowd gathered, only a handful of students remained, 2 from Lee's side, 2 from the karate side, who sensed the shift in the air. The karateka stepped to the doorway. He spoke quietly, without anger. "I think it's time we found out." Lee stopped moving. He turned, regarded the other man for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. "Whenever you're ready." No ceremony, no gloves, no audience beyond those already present. The mats had been cleared. A referee, one of the senior students, was quietly agreed upon. They faced each other in street clothes, shoes off, the only sound the soft creak of the wooden floor and the distant hum of the city outside. What followed would be remembered not for its length.
They stood perhaps 8 feet apart on the worn gymnasium floor, the late afternoon light slanting through high windows in thin, dust-moted beams. No formal bow, no verbal agreement beyond the quiet understanding that had settled between them. The referee, a senior student who had trained with both men, stood to the side, arms loose, ready only to stop things if they went too far. The handful of witnesses remained at the edges of the mat, breathing shallowly. The karateka moved first. He advanced with the directness of his training, weight forward, shoulders squared, right hand chambered at the hip for a powerful reverse punch. His intention was clear, not to destroy, but to demonstrate. One clean, heavy strike, he believed, would settle the question forever. Lee did not retreat. He did not tense. He simply shifted his lead foot a fraction, angling his body off the center line. As the punch traveled the last 18 inches, Lee's left hand rose in a soft, almost casual parry, fingers open, palm angled, intercepting the incoming fist just above the wrist. The contact sounded like a single dry clap. The karateka felt the redirection immediately. His momentum carried forward, but his arm was no longer on target. Before he could recover, Lee stepped inside the space the larger man had vacated. 3 chain punches followed in the time it takes most people to draw a single breath. Straight lead to the face, cross to the solar plexus, hook to the same solar plexus. Each strike landed with the sound of a book snapping shut, sharp, contained, no wind-up visible. The big man's breath exploded outward. His knees buckled half a step. He tried to clinch, arms reaching to wrap and control. Lee slipped the attempt with a small circle of the shoulders, then drove a single front kick into the midsection, low, precise, the ball of the foot connecting just below the sternum. The impact folded the karateka forward, air leaving him in a sharp wheeze. He dropped to one knee, then both, hands instinctively going to his stomach. His eyes were wide, not with pain alone, but with the sudden, complete recognition of something he had never felt before: absolute interruption. The entire sequence lasted 11 seconds by the wall clock's silent hand. No one spoke. The referee stepped forward but did not touch. The fallen man remained on his knees for perhaps 20 seconds, breathing in ragged pulls, then slowly straightened. Blood trickled from his nose, nothing dramatic, just a thin line from one nostril. He wiped it with the back of his hand, looked at the smear, then looked at Bruce Lee. Lee stood exactly where he had finished, arms relaxed, breathing even. He did not gloat, he did not speak. He simply watched, calm as a still pond. The karateka rose to his feet with careful movements, dignity intact, but certainty gone.
He gave a small nod, not the deep bow of respect one gives a master, but the acknowledgment one gives when truth has rewritten what one thought one knew. Then he turned and walked off the mat, past the small group of witnesses, out the door into the hallway. No one followed. The room stayed quiet for a long time. The witnesses did not cheer or discuss. They gathered their things slowly, as people do after witnessing something private and final. One of Lee's students later said the silence that followed was heavier than any shout could have been. In the months afterwards, the karateka stopped speaking about kung fu. He continued training, continued teaching, but the edge of certainty had dulled. When asked about the encounter, he would only say, "He was faster than I thought," or "I learned something that day," and change the subject. Within a year, he had moved to another part of the city. Some say he trained more quietly after that, incorporating elements of interception and economy he had never considered before. Bruce Lee never mentioned the incident in public. He did not use it as proof of superiority. He simply continued teaching, first in Seattle, then in Oakland, then in Los Angeles, refining Jeet Kune Do, emphasizing that the best technique is the one that works, regardless of name or origin. The story, however, did not die. It traveled mouth to mouth among martial artists, carried by students who were there, by people who heard it secondhand and recognized the ring of truth. Years later, when Lee had become a global name, when films had made his movements iconic, the brief 11-second encounter remained one of the quietest footnotes in his legend, not because it was dramatic, but because it was inevitable. It showed what restraint, precision, and absolute adaptability could do when matched against raw power and conviction. It taught without sermon, proved without proclamation. Those who knew the full story rarely retold it with embellishment. They simply said, "He challenged. 11 seconds later, the challenge was over, and something in the martial arts world shifted, just a little, but forever." The mats at the downtown YMCA are long gone now. The building has changed hands more than once, but in certain circles, when the subject of cross-style truth comes up, someone will still speak of that rainy afternoon in 1962, when a young man from Hong Kong stood still while the world around him moved, and in 11 seconds reminded everyone what real efficiency looks like. The story ends there, not with victory, but with quiet, irreversible clarity.